We have a vast preponderance of our electricity transformers, especially the large ones, that are Chinese. It wouldn't surprise me if those Chinese transformers had a back door and they could be turned off.
We don't even check them.
That is super dangerous. And there are a lot of other vulnerabilities that we haven't even thought about. The Colonial Pipeline, that was the appetizer for other things that could happen.
Let's talk about energy. I mean, are you aware of how weak our power grid system is?
It's pretty bad.
How would we develop more energy? I mean, from everything I've been told and read into and discussed on this show through numerous interviews, we are on the verge, it sounds like, of the grid going down. How would we fix that and develop more energy?
There's a lot to unpack there. There's an element that we can discuss that relates to national security. There's an element that relates to power generation. There's another element that relates to transmission and distribution. I'll begin with the national security stuff. We have a vast preponderance of our electricity transformers, especially the large ones, that are Chinese. Okay? It wouldn't surprise me if those Chinese transformers had a back door and they could be turned off.
We don't even check them.
That is super dangerous. And I tend to stay out of political discussions, but I sort of scratch my head when one of the first executive orders in the Biden administration was to allow for Chinese electricity transformers. And the prevailing thought was, oh, these are commoditized products, who cares? And, certainly the electricity companies wanted them because they were cheap, right? And they're looking for their bottom line, and the bottom line reflects in their share price, and their share price reflects in the CEO's, compensation. I get it. But I think we need to do a very deep dive on where we're vulnerable. And it's not just in our electricity transformers. Our port cranes are also vulnerable, those that are made in China. And there are a lot of other vulnerabilities that we haven't even thought about.
The water
Our
supply.
Water supply, sanitation. And so, like the Colonial Pipeline, that was just, that was the appetizer for other things that could happen. And so there's a national security threat. We need to fix that. But we'll table that for a second. On the power generation side, we are endowed with some of the best energy resources in the world. We have oil, we have natural gas, and a lot of it. We have all the minerals that we need to make, electricity lines, but we just don't have the will to. We were a net energy exporter, several years ago, and now I don't know where we are, but the trend line isn't what it used to be. And I don't really have a lot of heartache about transitioning from fossil fuels to renewable sources at all. In fact, my wife has a Tesla. We have solar panels on my roof. And that's great. The problem is we have to be intellectually honest about how these things work. So when you have a giant solar farm or a giant wind turbine farm, what happens when the sun isn't shining? What happens when the wind isn't turning the turbine? So that's a problem. And then you have to think about baseline power. If I'm a manufacturing company, I can't just rely on power like, oh, it's sunny today, I can start my manufacturing process. You need baseline power. And so to get baseline power, one of the solutions is to create battery storage. You need to have battery storage, right? Such that when the wind doesn't blow, you still have power. Now, to me, there's a stupefying level of intellectual dishonesty when it comes to the green energy world. While I agree that we should transition, I'm not going to dispute that. What we're doing is if we were to flip the green switch tomorrow, we give China the ability to become the OPEC cartel of one. In other words, China produces the vast preponderance of our solar panels. 90% of the photovoltaic material that goes into a solar panel is made by ethnic minorities in China in slave factories. These minorities are called the Uyghurs. They're not ethnically Chinese. And the Chinese are putting them in labor camps for making solar panels. So do we believe in human rights or do we believe in, climate change? Hopefully it's both. And then there's the issue of battery storage. Who makes the batteries? 70% of the refined lithium for lithium-ion batteries comes from China. 100% of the cobalt pretty much comes from Africa, where like 7-year-olds are in mines digging stuff up, which is awful. It all gets refined in China. The rare earth magnets for wind turbines are all made in China. And the list goes on. And by the way, to make a solar panel, what are you doing? China is burning coal from coal-fired power plants, and they're building 2 new coal-fired plants a month.
Wow.
To run electricity, to make a solar panel where they use, silicon tetrafluoride and hydrofluoric acid to make a solar panel that gets exported to the developed world, and we're like, oh, we're so good. Well, wait a second. What are we doing? And so I think we need to reshore a lot of that manufacturing activity to the United States, such that as we make this transition from fossil fuels into something else, which, by the way, should include nuclear, we do it intelligently. And we're not beholden to one supplier of everything. That's super dangerous.
Where do they get the lithium from?
So lithium is produced in one of two ways. There are hard rock deposits. The deposit is called spodumene. Then they sort of mash it up and turn it into a powder and then run a chemistry experiment and separate all the things out of it. Typically, that's done in places like Australia. In South America, they have what are known as salar deposits. So think of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. Now imagine that going on, that's 100 times bigger in places like Bolivia. Bolivia has a salt flat called Uyuni that sits, you can see it from space. It's like this white dot in the middle of the country. It's reputed to have 50% of the world's lithium. And so the way
50%?
Yeah. And so the way you process that is underneath the crust, you have salmuera. I don't know how you say that in English. Like a salty, mushy water. And you basically stick a straw in there, pull out the liquid, and then you bake it in the sun until it turns into a powder. And then it becomes a chemistry experiment. You separate the magnesium from the lithium and stuff. The Chinese are basically taking all of that and refining it in China.
How many lithium deposits do they have control of throughout the world? Do you have any idea?
It's not a question of controlling the lithium deposit. If they are the buyer of all the lithium, they don't need to control the deposit, although they do have some. Don't get me wrong, they have lithium deposits around the world. But let's assume if you're a random mining company and your only buyer is China, and China sets the price, you're a price taker. So they can control you without having to actually control the mine.
Okay. I hope I'm wrong here, but it is my understanding that China's investing in all these countries. Afghanistan's one with, from what I understand, very rich lithium supply.
And copper.
And they're putting in the infrastructure so that the Afghans can mine that lithium and give it or sell it to China. So
100%.
Would that be control of that mine? Because they put the infrastructure in.
Look, there are a lot of ways to control things without actually having to control them. So if you control the egress from the mine and you own the road, great. If you've bought out the government of a given country, that's, check. And if you are the buyer of everything that country produces, do you not control the country? You don't have to put a single People's Liberation Army soldier on the ground when you can just control the country through economics.
That's better put, but that's what I was getting at. Is so they control who they sell to as well, correct?
Yeah.
So if the U.S. wanted to go and buy lithium from Bolivia or Afghanistan or Mexico, and China says no,
Well, we can't.
No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.